Can you see the difference? Let me give you a little hint here. It's about cutting the cabinet in the depth, right? Okay, so the difference between these two is that one cabinet, the one to the left, the back panel is sitting in a groove, and on the other one, the back panel has just been attached to the back of the cabinet. And in this video, I want to show you how you can cut back a cabinet in the depth using these two methods. So let's get started. The first method we're looking at is the one I call cut and attach, because we simply cut the cabinet back in the depth and then we attach the back panel to the back of the cabinet. And it's fairly straightforward. There's just one little thing you need to pay attention to, because otherwise you won't be able to hang the cabinet up on the rail. And I will tell you about that when we get to it. The first thing you need to do is to measure and cut all those four parts of the cabinet. And when it comes to measuring, you have to keep in mind whether you want to cut it back a certain amount of inches compared to a cabinet sitting next to it, or you want to end up with the total depth of a cabinet. And if you want to end up with the total depth of the cabinet, then you need to take into consideration that you are adding the back panel on the outside of the cabinet box. And that means you have to consider that there's a 1/8 of an inch, that's about 3 millimeters, that are being added to the depth of the cabinet, plus whatever distance you have from the cabinet to the wall due to the rail. So those measurements you have to do on your own, and you have to calculate how much you're cutting off that cabinet before you start cutting. But keep in mind the thickness of that panel that we are attaching to the box when we're done cutting. Now we're getting to the most important part of this cabinet modification, because if you have seen one of my other videos where I am modifying a cabinet, you have seen that I'm using the cutoff as a template for drilling new holes for the bracket. And we're doing that here as well. But what we need to pay attention to is that if we just put that cutoff flush with the back of the cabinet and make the holes and put on the bracket, because we attach the back panel to the cabinet box, the bracket will be sitting about the thickness of the panel that we are attaching off. And that means you cannot hang it on the rail, because the distance from the brackets of which the bracket is protruding from the cabinet box is not enough to clear the rail. So what you see I do here is I push forward that template so it is protruding the part of the cabinet box we are keeping with the thickness of that panel. And you can simply put it on and do your best to line it up. And then I use the back panel as a measuring for when I have that correct offset. And it's very easy, as you can see. I just put it on and I make sure that those parts are flush now. So when the cutoff has been lined up with the remaining part of the cabinet box to my satisfaction, and it's absolutely flush, I can turn it around and I can drill those holes for the brackets. And when I've done that one, I take the other side of the cabinet and do the exact same thing. So now I'm ready to start assembling the cabinet box. Assembling the cabinet box is pretty much straightforward, but since we have cut away one of those lock nuts at the back, we need to put in some additional screws from the outside. And I use a screw that's about 1.5 inches long, and I pre-drill to make sure that I don't crack the material. When the cabinet box has been fully assembled, we are ready to put on the back panel. And as this is the method where we don't have a groove to put in that back panel, it is important that you bring out some sort of a square to make sure that the box is square, because we cannot use the back panel as a square like we normally do when we assemble cabinets. So bring out your square, make sure that you have the back panel sitting fairly in the middle to both sides and at the top at the bottom, and then square out the box and put in some nails. And that's it. Cabinet is fully assembled and ready to be hung on the wall. Method number 2 for cutting back cabinets is where we recreate a groove at the back of the cabinet for the back panel to sit in. And the first question that comes to mind is, which method should we be using? And I will say that depends on what kind of tools you have available. Method number 1 is clearly a method that do not require any tool for creating that groove, hence we don't have it. And but it requires a bit more thinking. I think method number 2 is, I wouldn't say easier, it's a lot more work, but you don't need to think much about it, because what we're doing is basically we are just cutting back the cabinet and then we are replicating the groove we have for the back panel. So there's no thinking whether to add or to subtract any measurements in terms of the back panel. But it is a bit more work, and that's what we're going to see right now. Just like we did with method number 1, we just unpack the cabinet and then we measure and find out how much we want to cut off. And the cabinet I'm modifying in this example is a high pantry cabinet, and it's a bit more difficult to cut the long sides. On this particular day I used my track saw, but you could also use a table saw or a circular saw or even a handsaw. When it comes to cutting that groove, there's a few methods as well. I will use my router, and that's what I find the most convenient. But if you don't have a router, you can also use a table saw, or you can even use a circular saw. I have not tried that. I used a table saw a few times, and I find that a bit more problematic, because the thickness of my blade is not the same as the thickness of the back panel of the cabinet. So I have to run it through the saw twice, and it was not easy to make a really nice cut. But maybe you're better at it than I am. As you will see, I'm using my router in this video, and it's fairly okay. I have an attachment I can run along the edge, but it's not that easy. So I upgraded and I bought myself an attachment I can put on and use my router on the track. But I couldn't make it work on this particular day because some parts were missing. So what you'll see is I'm using the attachment that runs down the edge. When we have made grooves in all 4 sides of the cabinet, we are ready to use the cutoff as a template once again for making holes for the bracket. And this time we do not need to let the template cutoff protrude the side of the cabinet, because we do have the groove. Everything is as normal. So you just put on that cutoff template and drill the holes. And when that is done, we're ready to assemble the cabinet. As usual, I will not spend time explaining to you how to assemble a cabinet box. And I've just shown you in the previous method how to remember to put in those extra screws when you cut away the back of the cabinet, where those stud nuts, lock nuts, whatever they're called, those long ones where you can twist to lock the cabinet together. Since this is a fairly wide and tall cabinet, I also put in the shelf. I look at the plan and see where the shelf is going, and then I also put some screws into the shelf, because I have also cut away one of those devices that are holding that shelf. It's I'm talking about the shelf that is the built-in shelf, not the one you just put in with pegs, but no, the built-in shelf. So I also put that on and give it a few screws. And then finally, when everything has been screwed together, I turn the cabinet around and put some nails to secure the back. And then finally, I put on the base plates for the legs, as I always do before I hang the cabinet. And that's it. Cabinet is ready to be hung on the wall. After a little bit of cleaning, of course. And as a final comment to those 2 methods of cutting back a cabinet, one could ask which one is the best method. Well, apart from depending on what kind of tools you have available, I will also say that if you cut the groove, I think that it's a better solution, because if you by accident push really hard on the back of the inside of that cabinet, if you put something heavy in the cabinet and you push it back, with a groove, you have something holding the back panel back towards the cabinet box. With nails, there's always a chance that you will just push out a nail. And when the cabinet is sitting on the wall, you do not have any chance to put that back in place. Just something to think about. Another thing to think about is that when you look inside your cabinet, you will see that the holes for putting in the small pegs for shelves, they're missing because you cut them away. So those holes, they need to be recreated. And how to do that, and how to cut the shelves and make that little half hole on the underside of the shelf. Check this video and you'll see how that's done. Thank you for watching. And as always, if you like what you have just seen, please consider subscribing to my channel. Thank you so much.